This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Regrow.
Hey, cannabis operators, got a couple questions for you. Are your SOPs tied directly to your cultivation plans? Can you easily manage your inventory and workforce and vendors from a single system? Can you manage compliance across multiple licenses and states? Do you have performance analytics to help you maximize your 24-month cultivation and manufacturing plans? If this is not the case, Regrow is there to help. They can help you maximize your yields and consistency. Think of Regrow as the single pane of glass view into your entire supply chain. They're available globally with native localization and foreign language support. So if you're a cannabis company searching for a strategic business partner to help you automate your business, scale effectively, and make the supply chain work for you, you can find Regrow at regrow.io. That's regrow.io. Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. Narbé, what's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making time for me in the audience today. Really excited to talk to you about, your role as president and CEO at RIV Capital, formerly Canopy Growth. But before we do, Narbé, let's talk about your background, man. The generic kind of first question, to kick this podcast off is, how'd you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, so I graduated from business school, specialized in strategy, finance, accounting. I got my CPA, so chartered professional accountant. It's a different name in Canada than it is in the US. And then did consulting for most of that time. Moved into M&A, did some mergers and acquisitions, and just really for my first love was the tech sector. And this is like way before Canadian legalization and so forth. So in the tech industry, I worked for a large telco, worked for startups, worked for the largest government funded seed investor. And then I moved to the largest VC fund and venture capital fund in Canada called Omers Ventures. It's a pension fund that had a venture capital arm, helped them raise 2 additional funds. And together we had over $1 billion of assets under management. Did a number of awesome investments within the tech scene. The one that is probably known most is Shopify, where we came in very early, was there all the way to the company going public. And then now it's worth 100 billion. Used to be worth 200 billion once upon a time because the markets are going like this. Can't keep track of all the stocks. But
Right.
what I really liked about the technology industry was the ability that nobody really knew what the future held. Like no one knows what's going to happen within the tech industry. Everyone's guessing, everyone has a thesis. It's a growth industry. And then when I looked at the cannabis side, I noticed there was a lot of similarities to it. Legalization hadn't happened, still very high risk. US legalization hasn't happened up to today too. And if you come in early on, like you and I have, you get this purview of how this industry is going to go. You get to make a thesis of how it's going to grow. You get to be part of that growth. And then 10, 20 years from now, when you look back, we'd be one of the pioneers of this industry because we're there from day one. Very similar to 1999 when the internet was just starting up and people were creating businesses. Some of them failed, some of them succeeded. But if you kept on the track 20, 25 years from that point, you look back and I get the whole picture and I can see how everything came to where it became. And nobody can really catch up to that. So that's kind of where I got into the cannabis industry. Always loved the plant, always appreciated from high school all the way to college to post-college. Think anecdotally, just there's so many things that you read about how it helps individuals that are suffering from medical conditions. The side effects of it are what people use from a recreational perspective. So that there's just so much love around the plant. It's so misunderstood at the same time that the light bulbs in my head were flashing that this is an opportunity to jump on as a professional.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's a perfect way, I guess, to kick this conversation off is, talk about that opportunity, right? That we know is upon us when it comes to cannabis legalization. So, tell me what your read is of the U.S. cannabis market, which I think you've been quoted on Seeking Alpha as the holy grail of cannabis. So tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that, and then we can get into maybe some of the predictions that you've talked about play out in 2022 for cannabis legalization in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the U.S. market generally, just get yourself out of cannabis for a sec. 25% of the world's GDP is coming from the US market. 40% of brands are coming out of the US market. So you have one country that represents 40% of brands in the US, in the world that have some sort of a name. Like there's a lot of talent within the US in terms of brand building, and there's a lot of dollars in the US in terms of building companies out as well. So when you look at the US market, pre-legalization federally, all the states are doing their own thing. There's an immense amount of opportunity out there to be there early, have an early license, build something out, be in front of the consumer, take advantage of these gray market marketing rules that are out there for legal enterprises before the rules start coming down and it looks kind of like pharma, like Canada does. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity. The population size, the propensity to smoke cannabis, the ability, the pharmaceutical side and the medical side, and how that's going to help people. Like there's data points after data points that just point to how important the U.S. market is. And then from the capital market side, you look at how the U.S. players are being traded at a discount to the Canadian players. Because of that, who knows what's going to happen from a regulatory perspective. But the delta or the spread between them is so big that it just doesn't make any sense. So whether you invest now in probably the lowest of the lows that I've seen in quite some time, or you invested back in November where we were every high, or even back in July of 2020, whatever that is, you're still early in the grand scheme of things in the baseball game. Like we're still in the second or third inning. When you look at how this industry is going to progress and what it's going to become.
Yeah. And I see your point about, I guess, the hesitation on the investor side, to get in with the uncertainty of the regulation and the legislation in the US, right? Which is why, these MSOs are undervalued compared to the Canadian LPs. But also, I wonder, is it also an awareness factor as well, right? I mean, the fact that these MSOs are not listed within the American exchanges and Canadian LPs are. I mean, when I hear the different Wall Street bets or Reddit forums, I mean, they're talking about the Canadian tickers mostly.
Yeah, you don't get much institutional play when you're on the CSC. We're on the CSC as RIV Capital, and volumes are much lower than what we saw when we were on the TSX. Now, if you're on the NASDAQ or the NYSE, then that's a completely different ballgame. So the inability to get in front of the institutional investor as a CSE player, you don't even really get in front of the retail investor in the US. You really do limit the size of market of investors that can look at you and play with your stock. That's going to change sometime soon. I think within the next 3 years, we're going to see a lot of the players start moving to the NYSE and NASDAQ. I think one of the things that really slowed down that progress was COVID. I mean, anyone from regulators all the way up to the governments, like nobody's really caring about anything outside of COVID and what COVID has done for healthcare and education and so forth. Cannabis reform isn't on the top of the list. And I think everyone just has to be honest about that, right? So right now the focus is on other things. Once we deal with COVID, once we get out of it, hopefully Omicron is the way out, then I think the lens will shift back to this point. You can't deny what the polls say about the percentage of Americans quarter after quarter, and that number keeps creeping up. And I think it's in the 70% now of Americans that want to legalize cannabis or want to decriminalize cannabis, that want to create an adult use platform. You can't deny that, right? And I know people who follow polls and invest based on polls, and they invested in this industry back in like 2013 in the US, looking at the polls and being like, wow, people want it, it's going to happen. And they've made a ton of money doing that. And I think there's just a ton of growth left for all of us to capture from this point onwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. And the 91%, I mean, Pew Research study came out with that number, talking about 91% of Americans are either in favor of, like you said, adult use or medical, right? One of the two. And I see your point about how it's not a priority right now, which I get and I agree with. I wonder though, like when we see studies about how cannabinoid therapeutics can help fight COVID, SARS, right? The virus, not in its decarboxylated state when you're smoking it or consuming in that way, with the acid form of the cannabinoids. So I wonder, with COVID being such a big deal, right? And of course, we're still kind of living through this with Omicron, as you mentioned, and other variants. Where does cannabis fall into that conversation? I mean, these studies are coming out, right? I mean, but what do you think that could in any way kind of bring more light and attention to the efficacy and the overall benefits of legalization?
That definitely do. Like, just broadly speaking, from a medical perspective, that you see all of these all this medical research come out that kind of points towards, hey, this isn't anecdotal. We have proof that it helps in certain things. And COVID is the latest one. We saw the minor cannabinoids and what they could do to COVID to halt the progress of the virus. We see that all over the place. The one of the problems is a lot of that research is funded by cannabis companies, which automatically, from an academic perspective, you ding it a bit because there's some bias involved in it. And then secondly, like, we need enough time to pass by where the same or similar studies are done that get to the same or similar results, so that it's undeniable that is true. And you can't speed these things up. These things do take time, but we're on the right track of it. There's nothing pointing toward against it. I mean, at times when I first joined the industry and I was still trying to understand it, my fear was always that one day we're going to wake up and we're going to see an article that says cannabis decreases life expectancy by 20 years or something like that. And you're like, oh crap, that would be crazy. That would destroy the industry.
I feel like we've already read those. We've already read those, Narbé. Those have already been published. What are you talking about? We're trying
the 1920s.
Yeah, we're trying to overcome the pile of content with SEO to combat all that propaganda that's been out there. I mean, I'm half joking, but like,
it is true.
Yeah, wasn't there like a time where there was overwhelmingly more negative scientific discoveries and studies around cannabis because of the lobbying and the money that was kind of put behind those, subjective, non-objective studies?
Yeah, when you read the history of cannabis as well, and the cannabis prohibition, like, a lot of it is rooted in racial discrimination as well, which is crazy when you go back to, you're like this is what you had to do to. And then the trickling effect of 90 years of prohibition just based off of that racial discrimination of jazz players and how they didn't want them to smoke the reefer. Like, that's nuts to think about it. But when you read the history, like, this thing is bound to open up for all of us, because if more people understand where the prohibition came from, they'll understand that it doesn't make sense.
Right.
But it just sucks that during that entire period of time, you just see so many people incarcerated for small amounts of cannabis, when people drink on the streets and they just get a slap on the wrist and a fine to pay in most cities. And drinking kills so many people. Alcohol kills so many people. Cannabis really puts people to sleep in the grand scheme of things. So, and I know I'm generalizing here, but like it is. There was I forget what I was. There was a podcast like years and years ago. It was a CEO of a I think it was a U.S. MSO, but it wasn't an MSO at the time. It was a single state operator. And he had mentioned that this is a fantastic experiment for a social experiment for us to do. The side effects aren't that bad. Like, there are side effects. There's side effects to anything. Any drug that you see in the commercials, there's hundreds of side effects that are out there. This social experiment of cannabis legalization isn't so bad in the grand scheme of things. And it's worth it to invest in it as a society to see where it's going to go because of all the benefits it can provide people.
Yeah.
Just want to add, like, one of my favorite studies is around the runner's high and cannabinoids. So up to for a long period of time, you're an athlete. The runner's high is still like this questionable thing. Like, does it actually exist? Is it mental or is it physical? What is this euphoria that people feel after they go for a 3-mile run? And for a long period of time, they thought it was a boost of endorphins. So they would give people endorphin blocking drugs, and then the control group and the other group would go for a run with placebo. And they look at it and they say, you know what, the runner's high, the feeling that they say afterwards, it still exists between both groups, even though one group was blocked from having endorphins hit their body, which is kind of crazy. If you go for a run, you don't feel happy about that. But then they also took into concept that a lot of professional athletes go to cannabis, even though they don't talk about it. The amateur athletes for sure do. And now there's a theory out there that the runner's high is actually tied to your endocannabinoid system, the same system that cannabis also hits as well, which is like mind blowing, because put those two things together and this thing can become something different. There's a whole product offering that just isn't there. Like you don't see sports and cannabis on the shelves of many dispensaries out there at this current point in time. So there's a whole market that we don't even know anything about. There's a whole market of weight loss with THCV that we don't know anything about. There's so many iterations, and this is why I'm saying like we're so early in the game. This is such a good investment for us to make as society. Like it gives me goosebumps just talking about it to you right now, Kevin.
Yeah, no, those are, man. I mean, you're getting me excited talking about. Yeah, THCV is insane. It's supposed to serve as some type of appetite suppressant, right? Which is mind blowing to think, because when you traditionally think about consuming cannabis, you have the munchies. You're gonna want to eat a lot, but in this case, with this minor cannabinoid, it doesn't give you that effect. Um, and also your other point. Go back to your first point outside of THCV. Because
The runner's high.
The runner's high. Yeah, yeah. So let me tell you this. When I in all of my 33 years of existence, and I've been an athlete, as you mentioned, pretty much all my life growing up until my adult life, I've never felt more zen and relaxed when I do these three things in order. It's when I work out, whether that be like lifting or running, followed by like heat treatment, so like heat therapy, so like sauna or steam room for like 15-20 minutes, and then consuming cannabis. Like nothing in the world bothers me at all. Like everything melts off, every little inkling or edginess that you may have or anxiety. I mean, I am just pure zen. And I think that you're right. I'm telling you that because I agree with you that there's something to the athlete recovery with cannabis. And of course, we're already seeing that with advertisements on the CBD side. But in terms of the THC efficacy, I think there's really something there also.
Yeah, like I know, so I know an NBA All-Star that just like preaches exactly what you mentioned right there, the same order as you mentioned. And they're well known in their circles to do it. Of course, it's not public, and I don't want to talk about it and get them in trouble, but that exists. And you see it with there's videos on YouTube that you can watch of professional athletes after they retire. They're like, this is stupid how they make such a big deal about this in sports and in the leagues, because we all do it. We all did it. And there's ways to get loopholes around the testing system, but it's either that or we got stuck on these drugs for the rest of our life that help us fall asleep and shut us down, because the bodies are just grinding after the game, right? They just like they're awake, like they can't go to sleep, and they have to sleep because they have to jump on a flight in the 5 a.m. in the morning and go somewhere else. So it is, again, going back to it, like this is such a good investment for us to make as a society to understand what's going to come out of there. And it's just a matter of time where it happens. So anybody look at the markets, and I know today, what is it? February 3rd, February 4th, almost, you get scared. You're like, what's happening in the cannabis markets? Don't worry about that. This is a long-term thing. If you're in it for 2 months and you want to flip your stock and make double the money, don't bother, or bother, depending on the time frame. But this is like something you want to hold on to for 5-10 years and see how it plays out, because there's nothing like this that's going to come down the line. Psychedelics don't even match to this, because there's not going to be a recreational or adult use market for psychedelics. It's going to be strictly medical for quite some time.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. That is a really good point. Although it seems like the psychedelic movement is moving faster in terms of acceptance on the medical side and research and adoption. But no, you're so right. It's a long-term play. And speaking of investment in society, that's a great segue. Let's talk about, RIV Capital and the investments that y'all are making in various companies, both, in Canada and in the US. What's your focus? Like, what are you looking for when you're investing, either by injecting capital and then also consulting and guiding these companies throughout the process?
Yeah, so back in December of 2020, we signed this deal with Canopy Growth where we spun out of their ownership. So they owned 30% of us, but they controlled 80% of us through multi-voting shares. And we sold 3 of our portfolio company interests to Canopy Growth for about 380 million Canadian at the time of close. We used a portion of that to buy out Canopy Growth's position and buy them out and give them cash for their ownership, retire those shares. We had a piece of that that went to liability, that a hefty liability that my predecessors had given us to handle. And then we were all in the clear. So we had about 220 million Canadian of capital, and we were out there ready to switch gears. So we pivoted away from minority venture capital type investments towards full scale acquisitions. Let's become an operating company. Let's start being valued at EBITDA and revenue and all the different things operating companies do. And that's a pretty hard, difficult switch to do within a year, because you're going from let's look at investments to let's build a team here where we create a product, we market it, we sell it, we can give it to the customer. So during that point in time, as we were looking for acquisitions, we bumped into one of our friendly corporations that we talked all the time, which was Scott's Miracle-Gro. They invested 150 million US or 200 million Canadian into us. So now we have about 405 million Canadian, or about 320 million US, and we're just geared up to do an acquisition within the US market. So we're becoming an operating company. Not to say that we won't do investments anymore. It's just we need that platform first, that basis, that foundation to then build on afterwards. So we're really excited with what we have in our minds and what we're planning to do and what we have in store. Haven't disclosed it yet, so can't really talk about it. I'm pretty tight-lipped, and my lawyers would kill me because this thing's gonna get published and have enough views. So, but hopefully we can disclose it, and I can come back here and talk to you about it as well.
Well, hey, okay, yeah, I understand the confidentiality factor. That is big moves, right? I mean, that is a complete switch in the focus of Canopy Growth prior, and then now with RIV Capital working on becoming its own operator and in the acquisition space. So this sounds like it'd be a good follow-up part 2 episode to have on once that announcement is released.
Definitely really excited to talk about it. I mean, one of the things that prior to coming on the show, talking to my team, I was like, well, should we push this to a month or two from now when we can actually talk about things? Like, no, just go do your thing. We've been pushing it long enough. And I was like, okay, fine, let's just talk about it. But it burns me up inside that I can't talk about it. So would love to be on the show again to talk through more detail.
No problem. No, we'll definitely make that happen. And I look forward to that. And I'm sure the audience does also. So let's get back to the US market. And I did see, I think within the Green Market Report, your predictions or the company's predictions for the US cannabis market in 2022. So in terms of states legalizing, that was kind of one prediction. And we've seen that the Mississippi governor has signed medical legalization into law. So, we're seeing more states come online. What are your predictions specifically? Which states do you think? I think you mentioned 5 that you're looking to legalize this year.
Yeah, I mean the 5 that we mentioned in the report. It's to take a step back. Like it doesn't really it matters, but at the same time doesn't really matter which 5 it is. The number one catalyst for federal legalization in this market is the states legalizing
state adoption
and recreational cannabis. Because if enough states do it and enough constituents of the U.S. population are under a legalized regime, and whether it's medical or medical and adult use, that just ends up knocking on the door of the federal government. If we can get like 40 states plus to do medical and about 25 states plus to do recreational, you start not knocking on the door of the federal government and say, well, what's going on? Like all these states are running different programs. If product is going between the states, they can't really capture it because the states aren't really talking to each other. We need a federal reform here. And like, beyond, like when the discussions around Schumer were this last summer, and even before that, when Biden got elected and everyone's talking about what's going to happen, like I thought that was all a red herring, because the number one catalyst are these states legalizing. And that's the point that everyone should have. If you want to know when legalization will happen, focus on that, because that's going to change things. So it doesn't really matter what states do. We wrote down 5 states that we believe that would be the ones that would turn this year. But no matter what, if we're going the direction of any states turning, and you're seeing New Jersey come online recreationally in a few months from now as well, that is a positive sign that you're on the right track. And with the prices of these stocks at right now, like it's jump in.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more with you. I totally think you're spot on. The focus should be at the state adoption level. Um, these federal elected officials can do a lot of talking, right? Like Senator Schumer and others, and that's great overall. I mean, just to have it be top of mind, I guess, for these politicians, but you're going to see movement at the state level. And in fact, on my website, cannabinoid-connect.com, I have a ticker. Every time you see a new adult use state go online or a medical state, I mean, because those are wins and it is going to force the hand of the government. So yeah, I totally agree. Let's also talk about consolidation. So, I mean, as we see more private single state operators looking more attractive to MSOs, I mean, is that kind of the theme that we're going to see through play out 2022?
Yes, but not all of it is the right move to make. So right now we're seeing kind of a rush to supply. So the more markets you can get into, the more diversified you can get as a company. And one of the things that exists right now, and it does irk me a bit, it is a bit of a pet peeve, is all revenue and EBITDA is treated the same. So if you're making, if you have a license in Minnesota and you're making $1 million, it's the same as if you have a license in Texas and you're making $1 million. Now, those are very different states. Texas is huge. Minnesota has 8 million people in it. And if you have a license in Texas prior to federal legalization and you build that out, like the growth rate on that is tremendous because the TAM, or total addressable market, is huge. So we haven't been seeing just a breakdown of state by state of like what states are attractive, and those attractive states you get a premium on the states that aren't as attractive because there's too much competition. We haven't really seen that play out. We do see a little bit of that with California versus the rest, and Colorado and Oregon versus the rest of the U.S. But we're not really seeing that in the scale we want to, especially on the East Coast. Now, right now, like it is a consolidation game. There are a lot of private players, single state operators that don't have the means of capital to go beyond their state. They're cash flow positive within their state. They're doing a good job. They also don't have the means or capital or sometimes the talent to build in the state to go against those large MSOs that are coming in with deep pockets. So at those points in time, you're seeing a lot of these companies put their hand up and say, "Hey, I think I might be ready to look at strategic alternatives." One of them being consolidation with a bigger player. And those single state operators typically go for lower multiples than multi-state operators do because they're really stuck in that state. So if you're in Massachusetts and you have the limit of dispensaries and the limit of cultivation, you really can't grow anything more than that. Like there's only so much traffic that comes to your dispensary. There's only so much of a lineup you'll get outside. Beyond that, you can't grow because you're at the limit of what the government gives you. And at those points in time, then you get taken out. But because there's no growth left in it, it's difficult to get a high price for it. So there is a lot of consolidation taking place. I think one of the things that people miss out on is, and maybe I'm jaded from the Canadian market, seeing how that played out, is supply isn't everything. It doesn't matter if you're first or you're second or you're fifth or you're 10th within the state, so long as you're in the state. What matters is creating quality product for a customer. So our view is kind of like, if we're developing this, we're getting in the game right now doing acquisitions. Like we want to create an anti-MSO in a sense. And I say anti, not to crap on anything that anybody's done, but I think that the real gist of it is we want to be consumer conscious. We want to be obsessed with the consumer. Like all I care about is creating great product for the end consumer. Making money right now piece isn't the goal. I mean, you have to do it because you're a public company. Don't get me wrong, and our shareholders want it. But the goal is this long tail of, if you can get quality product in front of your customer that they can rely on, it's stable, it's consistently quality product, then that has a long lens in terms of where that can go. And that's the key here, creating quality product for the end consumer. And a lot of companies do miss that. And it's unfortunate because they're going to get chewed out when federal legalization happens or interstate commerce happens. Like the brand piece is what's going to last, not the cultivation piece, because that's going to get commoditized over time.
And doesn't RIV Capital have some type of 5-stage model of cannabis brand evolution or something like that? I think that's what I read when I was doing some research. You want to talk about that framework?
Yeah, just the justice to shorten it without going through every single one is originally a brand is an item. So if you look at and I call it the deli counter. When you go to the deli counter at a supermarket, you don't really know what brand of ham you're getting or cheese you're getting. You just know what the type of cheese is or the type of deli is, and that you see a lot in like some of the states that have deli style offerings, like Colorado, where the packaging doesn't really speak to you. It's the product that you're looking at. And you go back in the days, like these are like the jars that your dealer would give to you in the legacy market, and you'd smell it, you'd be like, oh, what is this? They tell you what it is. All right, I'll get it. You're not asking where it was created, what farm was it from, and how much THC percentage does it have in it.
Where's the COA?
Right. So then the second stage is when brand becomes an attribute. And that's when you have packaging that really tells the story. In Canada, you don't have that. The government says, no packaging, which means that consumers don't get any cues. So they don't know what they're looking for when they go to the store. They just walk into a store and it's like everything looks the same. And it's very hard to determine what brand does what. In the US market, we have that bit of power play right now. And I'm saying it's temporary because someone could shut that down, where the packaging does speak to you and you say, oh, that's a nice color. That's a nice product. That's a nice bottle or tin can or whatever it is. Let's try that product out. So you get those cues, and when you go back, you see that packaging or that color scheme in a gummy form. You're like, oh, I know that brand. Let me try that out too. So you can create some loyalty off of that. But you're still attracted to the packaging, not the product. The third step is when it becomes a personality. And this is when the brand takes on a meaning of its own. Like Cookies does a fantastic job. Jungle Boy's fantastic job in the US, where the brand has something beyond it. So there's kind of like a following behind it, and like, hey, this is cool to have this in my hand. If I'm holding this jar, it's like there's some social currency involved in when I talk to people. Then the next two steps are about taking that a bit further, and the brand actually becoming something beyond that. So brand serving your values. So if I buy a product, that the proceeds of that product go towards that charity, that brand is very tied towards that charity or that cause. So instead of donating money to that charity, if I buy this product, I'm actually getting that value in it as well. And that's kind of the last stage. We haven't really seen people pass the attribute stage, people as in companies, pass that attribute stage as much, but it is coming. And soon enough, cannabis will become like Nike. Like you wear Nike clothes and you feel like an athlete, or Lululemon, you feel like you're doing yoga. Like there's certain feelings that you get when you drive a Tesla or you have an Apple product that you just haven't seen in the cannabis space yet. Maybe it's the stigma, maybe it's because it's early, but that's the chasm that we're going to cross over a period of time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, because the consumer base within the cannabis industry is so vast, right? I mean, you have the older population that consumes with different formulations in different ways. You've got the younger demographic, you've got the medical side and the recreation side. And it just seems like there's so many different causes and areas that cannabis touches, right? For instance, a big one, social justice, social equity. So partnering with organizations like Last Prisoner Project or others that are focused on social equity efforts, that makes sense. And it kind of seems like that's really going to be a catalyst to start to open up people's eyes and bring more awareness to these issues.
Absolutely, and it's going to come in a point in time where we're just not there yet. I do think that there is a lot of awesome talent. I think a lot of the talent does come from you do see that in California. So California is an unlimited market. Everyone can get a license, and I say everyone. There's no cap on it. And the talent pool that's in California for brand building is second to none, right? Because it is the epitome of brand building in the CPG, consumer packaged goods industry. So if you tie those two together and you see those top 10 companies in California consistently being top 10, they've got something in there that they need to prove to the rest of the US market and push out there. So it is an opportunity out there. We're still so early.
Yeah, it's like you said, first or second inning still. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. One more prediction that I want to cover is MSO valuations and fundamentals and the disconnect. I mean, I feel like that's, I guess, going to persist throughout the remainder of this year until institutional capital comes in, or I guess other factors. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so this is always a debate within our company, our team, because when we look at companies and we try to value them, like one of the things you want to understand is what's the terminal multiple, as in what's the multiple that you put on the company beyond a year, so call it year 5 or year 6 or 7 or whatever it is, where you're just assuming there's some maturity in the market, it's going to grow at the steady pace, and the profits are going to grow at a steady pace, but it's not going to be exponential like you see in the early days. And what we do is like we try to look at what exists in pharma, what exists in tobacco, what exists in alcohol, and beers and spirits and so forth, and wines, to understand what multiples those mature industries have, because we assume that over a period of time there's going to be convergence of those multiples with cannabis over the long term. So right now you might see higher multiples, especially in the Canadian names versus the US names. Right now it's low because of how the market's turned all across cannabis, tech, etc. But that's one of the viewpoints that we have, is that it's going to look very similar to tobacco and liquor over a period of time once it gets to the maturation stage. So we have that concept in mind. And then going back to like our earlier discussion, one of the disconnects is always that regulatory risk that's out there. Like we don't know what federal legalization looks like. We don't know what interstate commerce looks like. We don't know if the FDA is going to come and cram down on marketing and the inability to market like Canada. And these things will have rippling effects into companies. Like if you're cultivating in a very expensive state and interstate commerce rolls around in Texas and Arizona and California, cannabis is just going across the US and nobody can compete against it. Or Oklahoma is doing the low quality grade cannabis, that's going to be very tough for someone that's in an expensive state to compete with it. So we always think about like these shocks within the companies, and if we shock the company with standard of living changes or wholesale cannabis changes, can it survive? Can it have the same type of profit? And these are the ways that you think we really try to future proof yourself into what's going to come.
Mm-hmm. No, that all makes sense. And as we wrap up, I want to ask you, aside from the limited, information that you can give regarding future potential acquisition targets, what else is RIV Capital focused on for 2022?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's doing what we told the public for quite some time, which is getting that platform investment underneath us. That's not going to be the end of it. There's going to be more that's going to come after that, more news, whether that be investments, acquisitions, or things that we do launch. We've been gearing up for this for quite some time. We have strong network, a ridiculously good partner in Scott's Miracle Grow, and we're just geared up to be like a large player. Like I said before, like it doesn't matter if you're second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th within the market. You see this in the tech industry all the time. The incumbents will get crushed by the new players coming in as well. So I'm just really blessed to be here. I think we're all blessed to be part of this industry and to be on the front row of what's going to become. And I'm just super excited to see what 2020 is going to happen and what's going to prevail at RIV, because we're working on some awesome shit for quite some time now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is a blessing to be in this space, to be, really at the ground floor, as you mentioned, things just getting started. So really enjoyed having you on today, Narbé. Want to have you on again once that announcement hits, and we can talk about all the great things that RIV Capital is doing and planning to do in the coming future. So where can everybody find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more?
RIVcapital.com is our website, so you can go on there, and all our social tickers are there as well.
Awesome. Narbé Alexandrian, thank you so much for your time, my man. I really appreciate it. I look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks. Really appreciate it too.
Yes. And thank you all for listening. Bye.